For certain members of the community, not believing the allegations against Dominic Foppoli was a choice. Hello, and welcome to If Grapes Could Talk, your one and only source into the corrupt lives of wine country's elite. And who am I? What is Active 2030? Well, those and many others are secrets I will happily tell. But before we begin, I just want to remind you that this show is about real corruption and real people, and today we'll be talking about the theme of sexual violence pretty much constantly throughout, so if that's not something that your mental health is up for today, opt out. That being said, as always, I promise not to describe any of the allegations in graphic detail or show any graphic images. What I do is I describe trends and patterns, refer to specific details to emphasize my point, and I do sometimes make some dark, humorous comments, like when commenters on Reddit referred to villain Dominic Foppoli as the Grapist. In the previous episode, I summarized my research into disgraced former Windsor Mayor Dominic Foppoli. We learned that his aggressive behavior traces all the way back to the age of 20 and was present in both his personal and political life. Yet the evidence suggests his friends, family, and even local leaders thought he was something special, for reasons that, despite all of my research, remain largely unclear. The main thing is just that his generational wealth and that wealth's connection to the wine industry did make him a lucrative contact to those looking to bust into the glamorous world of wine. I ended by pointing out that those enamored with Foppoli's potential, I guess, included former Windsor Mayor Bruce Okrepkies, and the Okrepkies do seem to be somewhat of a legacy family in Active 2030, which I'll describe once I get into the episode for those that don't remember. Bruce's son, Jeff, who was the president of Active 2030, number 50, when I joined in 2015, is now running for Santa Rosa City Council. I actually forgot, and even editing Rye forgot, to roll this screenshot of all of the typical players in Sonoma County that have already decided to endorse Jeff Okrepkies, despite the fact that he was president of a drinking club with a charity problem. I also forgot to mention that if you want to have nothing to do with the business that Bruce and Jeff are associated with, because you have to be associated with a business to be a member of Active 2030, and they're associated with George Peterson Insurance. Editing Rye here. Sorry to disappoint, it's really warm in my office today, so I'm actually wearing my overthinking tank top and not an animal onesie today. Overthinking is a great word for this episode because it really is the one that I've struggled with the most, because the San Francisco Chronicle story, a drinking club with a charity problem, into Active 2030 International and Active 2030 number 50 specifically, Dominic Foppoli's club, they really made the key point beautifully that I would want you to take home is that Active 2030 at large, but the most extreme case is Active 2030 number 50, is an organization that is not safe for women, for feminine people in general. So yeah, I think I just struggled with this episode because I really want to encourage you to read the San Francisco Chronicle investigation called A Drinking Club with a Charity Problem that I served as a source for, because I think it really quality journalism. And if nothing else, I want you to remind yourself of what that is, just because I want you to have that example in your head in later episodes when I refer to the Press Democrats' coverage of scandals as weak. By the end of this episode, I hope you'll see why I have come to the conclusion that for certain members of the community, not believing the allegations against Dominic Foppoli was a choice, because they had all of the information necessary and they were choosing not to act on it. And if Active 2030 leadership didn't need to be ashamed of those choices, Why did they take down their membership history? In this episode, I'm going to be telling you about my experience in Active 2030 number 205, which had a very close relationship to Active 2030 number 50, Foppoli's Club. I will do a quick refresher of what Active 2030 is. It is an international organization made up of local chapters. Each chapter is a local city-town. So when I refer to Active 2030 number 50, I'm talking about Foppoli's all-men's Santa Rosa Club, and the other main club I'll referring to is Active 2030 number 205, which is the co-ed Healdsburg Club. And then geographically, Windsor, the town I was born in and that Foppoli was the mayor of, is right in between Santa Rosa and Healdsburg. Key point that I did not mention in the previous episode, actually, is that what the 2030 comes from is that you have to be in your 20s or 30s to be in the club, so you age out at 40. So I say that I was a prospective member of Active 2030. It would be more accurate to say I rushed Active 2030. Because I was a small business owner, Active 2030 was pitched to me as a networking opportunity that could lead to invitations to even more elite clubs, at least from my perspective, like Rotary Club. But already there was reference to a heavy drinking culture. When I went to my first meeting, which was like a pretty basic procedural making plans meeting, despite the fact that the meeting was pretty close to a mealtime, it was at a place at a bar called John and Zeke's where you couldn't order food. But yeah, you could order very inexpensive beer, even shots, if the meeting was too boring for you. To be 100% fair, John and Zeke's does sell microwavable hot dogs and potato chips. And like, I played rugby in college. It's not that I'm scandalized by the concept of alcohol being present in meetings or, adults drinking alcohol. What I'm really scandalized by as far as Active 2030 is concerned is the degree to which binge drinking was normalized. I think the main difference between Active 2030 and the rugby environment that I was in was that you could hang out sober, you could hang out drinking responsibly without being completely miserable. So as I mentioned, I was a member of Active 2030 number 205 in Healdsburg, but it was very common for the clubs to intermingle. At my very first intergroup Active 2030 event, I was warned about Dominic Foppoli. All of this has been corroborated by the San Francisco Chronicle in their investigation. I was warned about Foppoli. I was warned just in general to be careful when the number 50 men's club was around, and I was warned to watch my drink. So again, having been in college, having played rugby, and with heavy drinking comes the possibility that someone creepy is going to take advantage of that. I've had these conversations before, and this was different. This was just at a completely different level. It was like being in Black Mirror in a sense that it was so surreal that we could know all of this about this man and this club and be acting like it was totally fine to have them at this event dancing, drinking, and they're dangerous, and we know this. I think it's also worth mentioning that at this point, I didn't know that Dominic Foppoli was my representative on Windsor City Council. So when I started to get informed about local politics, that was fun to learn. I didn't actually witness Foppoli in action until an event on the Windsor Town Green. Sonoma County locals, you know how fun those concerts are on the Green. They're a good time. I was at one of those outdoor concerts on the Green, and I was in someone's canopy. It was a friend that I knew through Active 2030. Could not tell you who else was there, so don't ask. And Foppoli stopped by with an open bottle of, I think, Christopher Creek Winery, and just started pouring it just la 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 in people's glasses. I don't think he was even introduced to me at that point. He was just a city council person wandering around a public space, handing out free alcohol to people without checking their IDs to make sure they're 21. In one case, I saw him literally pour wine on top of someone's beer. That's just how he was. But like honestly, the part that was most disturbing to me and like really what stands out to me and like viscerally like my thoughts come up is how everybody else, and again it was mostly active 2030 people, just thought this was totally fine. And reflecting on this memory, something kind of productive that came out of it was I was like, no, the vibe wasn't this is fine. The vibe was like, this is awesome, this is great to be a part of this. Which really ties back to the previous episode and how what people liked about Foppoli was the way that he was quite happy to be people's bridge into the glitzy, glamorous world of wine. And just in general, when I did see him, he was encouraging people to drink to excess. Like, let's think about it this way. If I didn't tell you that someone was using alcohol, someone is using an intoxicant to get someone to the point that they're too intoxicated to give consent, that they're too intoxicated to have a conversation about if they want to have sex or not, and then have sex with them. That was any other drug besides alcohol. You would be like, oh yeah, that's a predator who needs to be put away. But for some reason, when it's a high-powered man and he's using expensive wine, it's fine. I'm really sorry I made that rhyme. The only time that I was in the same room as Foppoli and binge drinking wasn't involved. And what I mean by binge drinking not being involved is that I wasn't binge drinking. Since this was an active 2030 event at a bar, there was no guarantee that there was no binge drinking occurring. Was when he crashed a Healdsburg 205 meeting. I just remember him walking in there like he owned the place. And I think it's worth noting that he was with Sam Williamson, similarly to Liam McCormick, who I mentioned in the last episode. It really is public knowledge that Sam Williamson and Dominic Foppoli are quite good friends. Sam Williamson of Williamson Wines, you know, if you don't want to support Foppoli's friends' wineries. You know, when I looked up Foppoli's public Venmo transactions, I'm not going to show Sam's. I am going to show the, like, Foppoli's public Venmo transactions. We've got Ginger Cuddles. We've got Mayor Cuddles. It's weird. As I was going back through the public Venmos, which are still up as of Monday, January 10th, 2022, if you want to go look, I actually found two public officials that were linked to kind of two of the more questionable Venmos. So I think I'm going to follow up further on those and then include them in the next episode. But if you look it up, there were a lot of public transactions that are clearly friend transactions between Dominic Foppoli and Sam Williamson when the active 2030 membership history was still up. I'm pretty sure it was that Foppoli was Sam's sponsor. When I saw Sam Williamson at that meeting, I like immediately looked him up on Facebook. And at that time, it was a picture of him and Foppoli. And it looked like they were on like some private jet and like I think like sexy stewardesses and champagne was involved. If it wasn't, like that was the vibe that I got from it. Those are like that, just that image right there would give me, with my instincts, creepo red flag. Yet, for certain leaders in our community, they see the kind of person who would post that as like who they should prop up and make mayor. I actually chose the picture of Foppoli that I've been using with the sunglasses because like that's the picture that he chose to represent himself on the Active 2030 website for many years. That was the image that he was projecting when Windsor City Council people like Deborah Fudge and Bruce Okrepkies were apparently getting the impression that he was just so awesome. And yes, I'm being tongue-in-cheek here, but most women, if they saw that photo on a dating app, they would get creepo red flag vibes. So you may be asking yourself, okay, cool, Foppoli showed up at this meeting. Why was he so comfortable going to Healdsburg 205's meetings? And the answer is, I think, twofold. One, editing right here. For some reason throughout this section, I didn't want to tell you that I'm talking about Amy Holter. I'm talking about Amy Holter, Foppoli's long-term girlfriend / beard. Now, for those of you who don't know, a beard in the LGBTQI+ community is a straight, well, no, it's just a woman who pretends to date a gay man so that he doesn't have to like be outed as gay. It's like for protection. just instead of protecting the secret that someone is gay for their safety, which is a noble thing to do, she was protecting Foppoli from the consequences of his horrifying violence, which is, dare I say, evil. So Foppoli's girlfriend, when she was in active 2030, she was in the Healdsburg club. So that's one reason Foppoli probably would have felt comfortable. The other reason I think Foppoli would have been comfortable is that Liam McCormick, Foppoli's family best friend, that, as I mentioned in last episode, it's alleged via the chief on the blog The Really Right that Liam McCormick was partying dangerously with Dominic Foppoli all the way back in his college years. So Liam McCormick was dating, actually is now married to, then president of Active 2030 number 205, who I won't name by name. I bring up these connections to emphasize how enmeshed these clubs were with each other and how ridiculous it is to allege that allegations might have been isolated to one club or wouldn't have made it down the pipeline. These people were heavily enmeshed in each other's lives. So as I mentioned last episode, yes, I did meet Liam. He was around a lot because, as I mentioned, his then girlfriend, now wife, was the president of 205. And so whenever there was a social event where she would bring a date, obviously he would be her date. And I had a miscommunication where I thought Liam legit was Foppoli's family, not just a family friend. And because he seemed nice enough, I had sympathy for his situation. Thinking maybe he was the put down younger brother in this family of crappy people who has to put up with Foppoli, and if only he was empowered, he would actually be able to do something. So with that kind of in the back of my head and who knows how many shots of whiskey in my belly, one time I did confront him, sort of ask him what he thought about the situation. Again, I bring this up less so to try and hash out the specifics of what happened, but to point out this sounds plausible, right? If not me, if all of these allegations are out there, they're telling every single feminine person that comes through Active 2030 to watch out for this guy. And this is an environment where people are getting loaded on a regular basis. You really think these kinds of confrontations aren't happening from time to time, regardless of whether it was me or not? No, it's just not believable to me. And that's where really the crux of where I say not knowing about Foppoli was a choice to bury your head in the sand. I said I kind of refer to Amy as Foppoli's beard because of how the fact that he was dating someone who went on mission trips and was a director at Catholic Charities, was even under 40 because of all the wonderful things she does for the homeless. That was really key for Foppoli to be able to deflect from consequences of the allegations against him. For example, when Windsor Town Council was made aware of the allegations against Dominic Foppoli in 2017, Amy sent them a letter defending his character. And given that folks like Deborah Fudge had been publicly posting on her Facebook page that she enjoyed Foppoli's company since before 2017, that's really all she needed to decide that waiting 1 year to make Foppoli mayor was a nice punishment. Yeah. For those of you that missed that little tidbit in the San Francisco Chronicle investigation, when Windsor Town Council received the 2017 letter letting them know exactly who Foppoli is, they decided that his punishment was that year he would only be vice mayor as opposed to mayor. And he had told Bruce Okrepkies, remember him, that he really wanted to be mayor by the time he went to the Republican National Convention. Photo of him here at the Republican National Convention with just really all around fabulous human being Rudy Giuliani. And I bring this up in the Active 2030 episode because what's supposed to be the draw of Active 2030? Networking. And Foppoli, out of the networking of Active 2030, got a pristine image, white savior Catholic girl to defend him and deflect criticism. And I'll get into this in future episodes, but Amy Poehler, or that, I'm so sorry, Amy Poehler. Amy Holter appears to still be friends with a lot of the political leaders that allied themselves to Dominic Foppoli, which is part of my evidence that I don't think they're really taking the gravity of what happened seriously. Because there's just, now Amy in particular, there's just no way, because she was a woman in 205. Like, there's just no way she didn't know. I'm sorry, in my opinion. And so yeah, I mentioned that Amy Holter is a bit white savior, and I'm literally talking about a prototype that I learned about from No White Saviors. Now you can support them on Patreon. That's the best way to learn the framework that I'm talking about. You can also follow them for free on Instagram, but please take following accounts like this seriously and responsibly. Learn from the channel and pay them before you leave your opinion in the comment, because they don't need uninformed opinions to respond to. The main thing that was articulated for me, because I've always kind of gotten the ick about this but not been able to put my finger on it, is that white people that are really obsessed with helping people in third world countries, there is an element of racism there, because in order for those programs to exist, there's this presupposing that those communities can't fix their own problems. They need white people to. And that's especially messed up because most of the problems were caused by white people in colonialism. That is not to say any person who has engaged in like the Peace Corps or something like that is a bad person. I try to stay away from labels like good person or bad person, but God, with people like Foppoli, it's hard, man. So that's not to say that I think Amy is a bad person just because she got involved in programs like that. A lot of times really good people do get drawn to them because of the fact that the program appeals to their values of helping people and wanting to make the world a better place. The problem comes when, as they start to see evidence that these programs really do have that superiority complex, they don't adjust. And now some people might say that Amy has adjusted because she's focusing on helping the unsheltered in Sonoma County. But the fact of the matter is, like, we're gonna learn more about this, but Amy Holter and Chris Gabriel are both leaders in providing services to the unsheltered in Sonoma County, and both are now under investigation for their financial ties to Foppoli. So I think that really should make people question, just on top of like, don't let predatory men hide behind their girlfriends, wives, whatever. Also, so much charity is PR that in this day and age, you can't just say like, oh, that's a charity. Oh, that person volunteers. Oh, that person donated money. They're a good person. No, so much of that is PR. So we as the public need to be more critical of charities like Active 2030, like Catholic Charities, and make sure that they're not just functioning as PR machines for rich people and that they actually are serving their community. On that note, one of the things that I found most interesting about the article was that so most of the local chapters of Active 2030, right, they're not 501c nonprofits. So they're not even like purporting to be charities. They're like, oh, these events raise money for children's charities. But then because they're not 501c3s, they don't have to publish receipts and prove that their charities are actually, or like their fundraisers are actually helping anyone. One of Active 2030's most popular events is Kaboom, the fireworks on the Windsor Town Green. I think that's an event that really bolsters Active 2030's reputation in the community. It really offsets that frat image by being something that they can point to that's like, hey, this is a good thing we do. And I will say, at least for myself, I was under the impression that somehow Kaboom was a fundraiser. That was in 2015. In 2021, it's 2022 now. As a more critical thinker, I'm now like, how was a fireworks show supposed to make money? And I found absolutely no evidence that the Active 2030 version raised money, but I did find evidence that the organization that they took it over for, they confirmed that it didn't raise money. Like, it's great, they put on the fireworks, People love fireworks unless they have PTSD or a dog to take care of. Like, you can like the fireworks, but that in and of itself, like, isn't proof that they're doing anything for children in the community. I suppose I have to address their most obvious example of something that like actually helps kids would be their back to school shopping spree. So let's ask the parents, especially those that have read A Drinking Club with a Charity Problem. Do you want those men around your kids? Didn't think so. So there's really only one part of Active 2030 that's an actual 501c3 nonprofit. And from what I can tell, their job is just to protect the reputation of the club. It's not to protect the members, it's not to protect the children they serve, it's to protect the reputation of the club. So when they were aware that the club had like a bad, poor frat reputation, its response wasn't like, well, then let's get rid of all the people that are assaulting people. It was like, oh, well, how do we fix its reputation? The other really shocking thing to me about the article, and I think just like hammering home the point that Active 2030 cares more about its reputation than actually protecting people. Active 2030 has expelled Dominic Foppoli, so that's something. But they've also expelled Samantha and Rachel for tarnishing the name of Active 2030, when they should be giving them a Medal of Honor for protecting so many women that could be suing their asses off right now. And they have not, to my knowledge, expelled any of the members that would have been privy to information about the Foppoli and therefore could have also protected the women the way that Samantha and Rachel did. I ended up not joining Active 2030 for two main reasons. One, it wasn't helping my business. It just wasn't. And two, queer phobia. And I very intentionally say queer phobia as opposed to homophobia because it was the kind of place where like you could be gay, you could be out as gay, you could be out as a lesbian, you could really even be out as trans maybe, if you conformed to traditional gender roles. If you were like, for example, an effeminate gay man, you could definitely anticipate some gender policing around that and being made to feel uncomfortable for not being someone who fits the traditional masculine stereotype. And that was definitely something I experienced as a gender non-conforming individual. I actually identify as non-binary and I use both she, her, and their, them pronouns. And yeah, I didn't try to assert that in Active 2030. It was not a safe space to try and do something like that. I did once, at an Applebee's, get in a screaming match with what I would consider at the time the most influential member of that Healdsburg club over the effeminate gay man issue. Because he was trying to assert that even though he would make fun of someone for being effeminate or he would judge someone for being effeminate, that this didn't make him a homophobe or a sexist or anything like that. Making fun of a gay man for being effeminate is misogynist, homophobic, queerphobic, because it's based on gender norms created to enforce colonialism, and is therefore even racist. That's a bad look when people of privilege do that. When they go, oh, I'm not thing, when someone is trying to help them, trying to call them in and help them and explain to them that what they do is hurtful so that they can stop hurting people that they purport to care about, right? This person wants to do good for children. That's what he claims. Because he helps marginalized youth, he's likely to work with gay, lesbian, trans youth. So I'm helping him not harm them by educating them on what it's like to be queer. But he didn't want to hear that because it hurt his ego. Also, just to be clear, I don't think everyone in Active 2030 is complete garbage. Like Rachel and Samantha, before they were expelled, were dedicated members of Active 2030 that really did care about children. You know, even the person that I mentioned that I got in the screaming match with at Applebee's, I could see that he felt turmoil over like, does this club actually do anything good? He really wanted it to, and I think he struggled with the fact that he could see sometimes it really was just about partying. But yeah, like that was the thing, that was the priority, was just like queer people had to feel uncomfortable or completely on edge to conform to traditional gender roles, whereas like Foppoli can do whatever he wants. Now that I've sort of explained how my history with Active 2030 just makes it so difficult for me to believe that people really close to Foppoli didn't know. I've really been unsure of actually which episode I want to film for next week. While I was re-going all of like my notes and my source material for this episode, I came to realize how instrumental Amy Holter really is in answering that key question. How did Dominic Foppoli become the mayor of the family values capital of wine country? Amy Holter is a key figure in understanding why women leaders in Windsor, like Councilwoman Deborah Fudge and many others, might have been able to delude themselves into thinking that Foppoli wasn't a bad guy, despite all of the allegations against him. Because that's really the only excuse they have. So, subscribe if you haven't already so that you will be the first to know next Tuesday when that episode drops. You can also follow me on social media. I also have a couple things that I would like you to tell me in the comment box below. One is that this episode would have like doubled in length had I gone too deep into what businesses in Sonoma County benefit most from their relationship to Active 2030 number 50, especially since I would now have to go through the web archives instead of the actual membership history, which is a lot slower. So before I do that, I want to actually see commitment from people that they want that and they would watch that and they would actually use that in their consumer choices. So if that's something you want, please let me know in the comment box below. Or if, there are a lot of people that don't want to be publicly associated with the show, and I get that. So that's why I do make myself available through social media. Please feel free to reach out to me through there via direct message. So until next week, you know you love me. XOXO.